我们第三位第三个是那个 Professor Kathy Johnson。Dr. Johnson 是IUPUI 心理学系的终身的教授，并且他是这个教务长，做了很多年的心理学。主要是我们有一些家长有些反映说，在这个快考到大学了，跟孩子谈，但是你说东他去西，他一定不去你要去的那个方向，所以家长很着急，该怎么办？所以我们今天也有幸请到Dr. Kathy Johnson 为我们讲一讲这种青少年的心理，尤其在考大学的这个过程中间，如何能应对跟小孩能做更好的交流。
Truly a pleasure and an honor to be here. I am going to talk mostly as a professional psychologist, but I want to add a warning before I begin that I also am the parent of 4 teenagers, and sometimes it is very easy to talk about what we should do, and in reality, sometimes my children do not communicate very well with me. So I will give advice based on the professional literature, but please know that I am still learning as well. My background is actually in developmental psychology. I received my PhD from Emory University in Atlanta, and I have been a professor ever since. I started out doing research on child development until about 5 years ago, and at that time I went into more administration. I was department chair in psychology for a few years, and now I serve as Associate Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate Education at IUPUI. Thank you. And I have responsibility for all students who are entering the university, and we are particularly concerned about trying to help students to maintain connections with their families when they are away from home for the first time. So I thought I would talk basically about 3 things. First, I wanted to introduce a bit of what we know about some of the struggles that adolescents go through. I then wanted to talk a bit about parenting styles, and then finally communication, and offer some advice about strategies that might help during the teenage years. So during adolescence, the primary goal for teenagers is to develop a sense of identity. Sometimes we call this an identity crisis. And to form a sense of identity, teenagers need to develop a sense of autonomy, a sense of being independent of their parents and forming their own beliefs about the world and their own sense of values. Sometimes those beliefs and values might match those of the parents, but sometimes they do not. And I think sometimes that communication starts to suffer when sons and daughters, when teenagers decide that they don't always agree with what their parents think. Sometimes some of that is healthy, but I know that this also can provide challenges with mothers and fathers. Another thing that teenagers really turn to is their peer group or their friends. During the teenage years, what other teenagers think is often much more important than what we think as parents. They will turn to their friends for advice. Sometimes they will ask for advice about you and how to deal with their mother or their father better. And they really care greatly about being like other members of their peer group. Another thing that teenagers need to figure out how to do, and this is particularly important for success in college, is they need to develop skills as self-regulated learners. And basically what that means is that teenagers need to figure out on their own how to manage their time, how to set their own goals, how to study even when their mother and father or their teacher is not reminding them to study. Basically, they need to create intrinsic motivation to engage in those sorts of behaviors that earlier on in childhood you probably needed to remind them about. We find at college that the students who tend to get into the most trouble early on often had parents who were very, very controlling in high school and set many, many rules. and then they go to college and suddenly the rules are not there. And if they have not developed the skills to self-regulate as learners, sometimes they make very bad decisions. And sometimes they start to drink or get into academic difficulty. So I think it's helpful, I found with my own children, that even in high school, giving them a little bit more space so that they can start to make their own decisions even while they are still at home with you, giving them a little bit more freedom, that is very helpful, because then it won't be new when they go away from home for the first time. So now let me turn to different types of parents. Obviously there are lots of individual differences or variations across parents because we all have different personalities, we come from sometimes different cultural backgrounds, and we've had different experiences with our own parents. But generally parenting styles fall into one of 4 types. One dimension of variation is how much warmth parents show. So warm parents tend to show lots of affection, maybe physical affection, talk a lot about feelings, are very nurturing, whereas colder parents tend to not do those things. There might be more strictness, less display of emotion, for example. The other dimension has to do with how rigidly rules are set and how standards for behavior are conveyed. So some parents have a very high degree of control over children's behavior. Other parents are much more flexible or much more permissive. So you get the 4 types by crossing those 2 dimensions. So you can be warm and very controlling. You can be warm and not controlling at all. You can be cold and controlling, cold and not very controlling at all. Does that make sense? The best combination in terms of maintaining a positive relationship with children, even into adulthood, tends to be that warmth style combined with having some control over the child's behavior. So combining that warmth with those high expectations and setting of expectations for behavior, that seems to be particularly helpful. And it's particularly important for parents when they do set limits or when they do decide to have consequences for a child's bad behavior. It's good to explain why. So a hallmark of this type of parent is a lot of explanations for why there are rules, why you expect children to act in a particular way. And it's helpful to children, and especially teenagers, to hear the rationale, the logical rationale for that approach. So in the teenagers, communication can be challenging, and it can be challenging for several reasons. First of all, our sons and daughters tend to be very busy. As you just heard, there's lots of things that admissions committees are looking for, and there's a tendency as a parent to encourage your child to schedule their time well so that they are well-rounded in music and athletics and they're taking AP courses and so on. That creates not very much time for communicating with anyone, especially when they're in school for much of the day. Again, as I said before, peers become very important, and if your son or daughter has the choice between communicating with you and communicating with their best friend, they're probably going to choose their best friend. And again, it isn't because they don't love you, it's because at that stage of life, what their friends think is very, very, very important. It's just a natural aspect of being a teenager. Some parents fall into negative patterns of communication. We call negative patterns of communication those patterns that involve lots of criticism, lots of nagging, and we develop these habits sometimes when we're talking with each other, and teenagers pick up on that. If they assume that when you start talking with them, you are going to start lecturing or nagging or criticizing, they will gradually steer themselves away from that and avoid interaction so as to avoid those other things. So some strategies for helping to improve communication at this time include the following. First, it's very helpful to be a good active listener. The quieter you are, oftentimes the more your son or daughter will open up. I know I fell into a bad habit with my daughter. My daughter is actually Chinese, and she does not like to talk about her feelings at all. And that used to really worry me. And so I would always ask her, do you feel happy? Why do you look angry? Tell me how you're feeling. And it was driving her crazy. And eventually she stopped wanting to talk to me at all. So I, put my psychologist hat back on and decided, oh, that's a really stupid thing for me to be doing. And instead I tried to just listen to her and give her time and space to open up. It helps to take advantage of those times that are in between activities. Those of you who do a lot of driving to lessons or to after-school activities, being in the car is a great opportunity to just chat and check in with your child about how things are going. And again, it's a great way to just listen because there isn't that face-to-face contact, which might be more intimidating. It's helpful to check in often, but not too often. There's kind of a fine line between staying engaged with your son or daughter and nagging or pestering. And so it's good to try to find a balance so that they know that you care about them, that they know that you love them, but they're not being bombarded all of the time by reminders or criticisms from you. Again, giving teenagers space, especially towards the end of high school, is very helpful because they'll again develop those habits that will enable them to be more successful in college. And finally, I would recommend being engaged in the same sorts of technologies that they are engaged in and knowing what they're interested in. Spending time with them, watching what they watch on TV, if they have time to watch TV, or going to concerts with them so that you know what it is that they enjoy doing. And I find myself, I have one son who's currently in college. I'm using a lot of the technologies that he uses to communicate. I follow him on Twitter. He invited me to follow him on Twitter. I'm a friend on Facebook. I text him. I use FaceTime or Skype on the weekends. And those are nice ways to check in, and they like you to be thinking of them, but it also gives them space and flexibility to be with their friends as well. So I hope this was helpful. I was unsure who would be here and exactly what you would want to know, and I think there will be time later on for questions, Peggy had said. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much for